911 operators, what call will you simply never forget? Story 1. Not me, but my sister is a dispatcher. One time she received a call from a man who said he had just killed his sister and brother. She kept him on the phone for 5 or 6 minutes to make sure he didn't run before officers arrived. She got him to admit they had all been drinking and playing cards, then got into an argument when one of them accused the other of cheating. The other two went to bed, but this guy stayed up stewing. Apparently he couldn't let it go. He shot each of them in their beds while they slept, then called 911. I heard a partial recording of the call, and she sounded calm AF. She told me she was screaming on the inside the entire time. Story 2. Student paramedic here. Had a call being generally broadcast over the radio when I was chilling in base with my mentor. We were on a 2-man car ambulance. The operator who was broadcasting said something along the lines of, female, reportedly unconscious, police on scene, major trauma, pause, CPR in progress, confirmed arrest by police on scene. My mentor looks at me. We're off in 30 minutes at the end of a night shift, but we go anyway. We're around the corner. Make it there in no time at all. There's police everywhere, at least 7 squad cars. I'm nervous as hell, and so is my mentor. As we approach the house, a man emerges, handcuffed by police. He looks content enough and smiles at us as we walk by. Police shout for us to hurry. We run over with equipment to the front door and are met with one of the worst scenes I've ever seen and will always stay in my mind. There's a woman lying on the ground with the left side of her head caved in, blood absolutely all over the place, and brain matter scattered around the floor too. Police are doing CPR. We stop them when we see the patient has signs of pooling in rigor mortis. I'm literally sweating and on the verge of tears. This is not how I wanted my shift to end. Then we hear from behind us more police in the house and the sounds of children. 2 kids are escorted out of a bedroom behind us with their eyes covered, and one of them asks, "What's going on? Where's mommy?" My heart melted. I've never been exactly traumatized by a job, but those kids being shielded from what just happened to their mother will stick with me forever. I bring equipment back to the ambulance as my mentor starts to do paperwork, and we wait for someone to move the body. Social services arrive and take the kids, blissfully unaware of what's just happened. Was off 3 hours late after all the paperwork and interviews with police. Story 3. This actually happened a few days ago. I'm an ER tech, but one of our unit secretaries, someone who transfers calls and does other important tasks that keep the place afloat, is an EMT in the next county over. I was waiting for a patient to return to their room, talking with her, when she looked down at her phone. She told me she has the dispatch app or whatever for ambulances and fire trucks, and every fire hall in the county had just received a call about a possible decomposing body. Apparently, the neighbor called about a terrible smell coming from the property. Hazmat was called and everything, expecting a dead human body. Once they broke into the house, they found that it wasn't a dead human, but 38 dogs in the house. 11 of the dogs were dead and in varying states of decomposition. The place is still pretty much under wraps, but 16 more dogs were found in the shed yesterday. The 2 people who own the house have since been arrested and charged with 51 counts of animal cruelty. All of the animals left alive were taken to the Humane Society, where half of the county has just about donated food or blankets. The whole thing is pretty messed up, but I now for sure respect the hell out of the EMTs and paramedics that walk through our doors every day. They really never know what they're going to see when they walk into a place. Story 4. I've been a 911 dispatcher for 11 years in a medium-sized center, population approximately 180,000. We have more than our share of crazy calls, but there are only a few calls that have stuck with me. For me, the ones that I can't get rid of aren't even close to being the craziest or most brutal. 7 to 8 years ago, I took a 911 call from a man who came home to find his adult sister had been raped and beaten. The suspect had wrapped a telephone cord around her neck, then tried to push her through the window of the apartment. He was understandably very distraught. She was still alive and was able to talk to me. She had not been blindfolded, and I was certain I could get a description of the person who had done this to her. She answered all of my other questions, but absolutely refused to give me any info on the suspect. I later found out that the reason was self-preservation. The person who did it was the brother who called 911 for help. He was so believable, it really messed with my head. I also felt horrible that I had continued pressing her for info when the person who hurt her was right there, and that I could have potentially put her in more danger without realizing. Story 5. I took a call from a man whose one-year-old daughter fell in the pool while unattended. At the time of the call, she was not breathing, unresponsive, and had no pulse. My partner dispatched out fire and EMS while I was on the phone. Got the child's mother to start CPR. Fortunately, she was certified and didn't require very much instruction at all. Just had to tell her to count her compressions out loud so I could keep up. Before first responders arrived, the baby started breathing again. I believe she sustained some brain injury, but nothing life-threatening. Had to go take a walk around the block after that one. Please, 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 if you aren't CPR certified, get certified. It very well may have been the difference between that child living and dying. On a lighter note, I also had a guy call in claiming he was having a heart attack. None of the info I got from this guy indicated he was even remotely at risk for one. Mid-20s male, average weight, no history of heart problems, or any other medical history for that matter. Turns out he had smoked some particularly strong pot about 30 minutes prior to calling. Absolutely nothing wrong with him other than he was stone stupid. We got a pretty good laugh out of that one. I also took a call from a kid who was about 10 years old who thought it would be funny to prank call 911. He started off by saying there was a fire. I could hear him giggling in the background. Followed that up with meowing at me over the phone. Managed to get a good location off the call and got his address. Read the address to him and asked if that's where he lives. Click, all right, got you now, you little troublemaker. Had a deputy go out to the house, as is our policy, and he explained the situation to the parents. Deputy told me later the kid got the scolding of a lifetime. Super gratifying. Story 6. This one still bothers me because it's so fresh and our community is hurting from it as well. Took a call from a hysterical woman advising me of a rollover crash that happened near her house. She lives near the top of a blind hill that people like to jump, like catching that butterfly feeling in your stomach, although you can get air in the right vehicle. She tells me that a girl is laying on the ground about 30 feet or so from the vehicle. When asked if the girl is alive, she says, "Oh yes, honey, she's wiggling around on the ground. My daughter is a nurse. She's checking on her now." Awesome. We hardly ever are lucky enough to have a trained professional on scene before a med unit can get there. But then she tells me her daughter is starting CPR. To be honest, that didn't surprise me. My caller was getting hysterical again, and we already had first responders on the way, so I started asking more questions about the scene. Her daughter breaks CPR to get on the phone with me. Tells me she can do compressions only, that the girl's jaw is completely gone. A bit stunned, I tell her to continue compressions. But rather than getting put back on with the original caller, I hear the scared voice of a teenage girl, the driver. Is my friend going to be okay? I can't find anything to say for a moment. Finally, after what seemed to be too long, I say, "They're doing CPR, dear, and we have help on the way. Are you and the other passenger okay?" "We're fine. Just please tell me she's okay." The girl on the ground was confirmed DOA. She had been laying down in the back seat without her seatbelt on because she had a headache. She was 15. Story 7. On my second full-time shift, it was about 11 p.m. on a Thursday. We get a call from a female, screaming, just screaming. That's all we heard, we lost connection. Second 911 call from the neighbor across the street. "I think I just heard a gunshot and now our neighbor is screaming, yelling for help. I think something terrible happened." While my partner was getting more info from caller number 2, 911 rings again, and it's the original caller. She's still screaming, but is trying to speak, even though I can't understand anything she's saying. After a couple very stern verbal slaps of, "Ma'am, I need you to calm down and tell me what is going on," she's finally able to tell me that she thinks her husband just killed himself. She went on to explain that they were watching a TV show together. Everything seemed normal, when he got up and said that he would be right back. Wife heard the back deck door open and close, and then she heard a gunshot. She ran to the door and just saw his feet and legs lying down on the deck. She called initially but was unable to control herself and accidentally hung up. She was still a complete disaster when I talked to her, but I was able to get the basics of what happened and relay the info to responding officers and fire. She kept telling me that she needed to go outside and help him. Do I need to go out there? Do you need me to go out there? I don't want to see him. I can't see him. My only job at that point was to try and keep her calm and keep her from getting up from the corner of the kitchen floor where she had collapsed until police arrived and secured the weapon. They had been married 27 years, 2 kids, 3 grandkids, lived a happy life together. She had no indication that anything was wrong. Her husband got up from the couch, walked out onto the back porch and took his life with a black powder pistol. I don't remember her name, but I will never be able to forget her screams. Story 8. One that sticks with me is a 14-year-old girl that calls the police for a disturbance. Officers show up and everything seems average. Parents advise the reporting party is upset because she isn't allowed to go out with her boyfriend. Officers are getting ready to leave after being there for 40 minutes, but something seems off to them. The 2 officers take the 14-year-old outside and near their patrol units to speak to her. While they are walking outside, the girl's mother, stepfather, and 2 sisters go and stand on the porch to see if they can see what is going on. They are unable to hear due to the officers and girl being on the other side of the street. It was then when the stepfather started pacing and went inside. The girl breaks down and tells the officers that her stepdad has been sexually assaulting her for years, and he didn't want her to go see her boyfriend because he was jealous. The officers look up, and at that moment they see the stepfather shoot the mother in the back of the head. He proceeds to shoot the reporting party's older sister in the chest and her younger sister in the leg as they started running away. One officer returns fire while the other is shielding the reporting party. The stepfather runs inside and barricades himself. The reporting party tells the officer that her 2 brothers are inside with the stepfather. Backup arrives and surrounds the home. The officers make forced entry after they hear gunfire from inside. They storm the residence and find the stepfather has taken his life with his 2 biological sons in the same room. The mother died instantly. The older sister died instantly. The younger sister was hospitalized. I don't know if she made it, just know she was flown to a hospital miles away. This 14-year-old lost her family. Later, the investigators were taking her statement, and her only reply was, "Last time I tried to tell someone the truth, I lost my family. Doesn't matter what I say. I'm alone now." It took hours to get in contact with the family. Eventually, we were able to get in touch with her grandparents, and she left with them. Story 9. I used to work for 111, which is the UK's non-emergency line, but at least a third of the calls we would take would be emergency calls, or potentially emergency calls, heart attacks, strokes, etc. I remember a lot of emergency calls, suicidal patients, patients who had only just stopped breathing, and the people with them refused to do CPR. But the one that hit me hardest was a miscarriage. I had a young single woman call late at night screaming in agony, in absolute panic for her baby, completely unable to move to open the door to let the emergency services in. Fortunately, we were able to pass the dispatch details of any emergency call directly to 999, even though we had to stay on the line with the patient. And I remember having to sit there listening to this poor woman have a horrifically painful miscarriage and the absolute distress she was in at losing her baby while she was all alone with no family to call on. And I felt completely helpless. All I could do was stay on the line with her and tell her help was on the way. Story 10. I've been a police dispatcher for a little over 2 years. The call I'll never forget is the first suit caller I got. It was around 11:30 p.m., and this girl calls 911. She must have been 19 to 20 years old. All she says is that she is just calling to let me know where to find her body. I ask her where she's at, an address, intersection, anything. She tells me she's old enough to know that I already have her location, so she doesn't need to give it to me. That's not true. All I have is the location of the cell tower her cell phone is pinging off of. No way I can find her. I plead with her a bit, and she finally gives me an address. Then I ask her how she's planning to do it. I'm trying to keep her on the line as long as possible so she doesn't actually hurt herself, but she doesn't answer me anymore. I decide to get the paramedics on the line so we can get police and fire rolling to her location. While I'm connecting to the fire department, I hear this crash and a choking sound. I don't know what she did, but my heart drops. I'm thinking she hurt herself with me on the line. I give the address to FD, and I have PD on the way. I'm listening on the radio while I'm trying to get this girl to talk to me again, when I hear the officers ask to verify the address. They don't see a house there. Ugh. I finally get this girl to come back on the phone, and she's crying hysterically. I ask her what happened, and she tells me she was in the bathroom and tried to hang herself. She was too heavy, and the shower curtain bar bent. I'm a bit relieved because she's not dead, but she's still in danger. I ask her to give me the address again, and even though she's on the same street, her address is further south. Now I have to get officers and EMS that are closer to go. I start talking to her, and so far, so good. Officers get there, but they can't find her. I'm freaking out because I'm thinking she gave me the wrong address again, and she stops talking to me again. Just an open line. I don't know what to do. Silence. I attempt hanging up and calling her. No answer. I'm thinking I messed up. I ask my supervisor if there's anything else I can do, and they reassure me and tell me I did all I could. I listen to the police radio for a bit and see that the officers managed to get into the house and found the girl, and she was being transported to the hospital. It was a huge weight off my shoulders. I took a break for a few minutes to collect my thoughts and went back to answering more calls. We were busy. Story 11. There are a few I'll remember for a long time. One was a guy who, while riding his bike, saw a father running after his grown-up son. He was yelling, "Stop him! He wants to hurt himself. He wants to jump in front of a train." When the guy was calling, he was running after the two near the train tracks. I quickly sent their location to dispatch and stayed on the phone. The guy asked if he could tackle the son if he had the chance, so I told him he could do what he deemed fit, but should always think of his own safety. However, he then started yelling the train was there, and I could hear it in the background. He started cussing and screaming, and I immediately knew the son had in fact jumped in front of the train. He died instantly. It was horrible for everyone involved. The guy immediately started blaming himself for not being able to stop it. After all that, I took a short break outside and then continued work with less empathy for people calling for whatever their neighbor did. Story 12. Not me, but my mother's been a 911 operator for the past 15 plus years or so, and I'm sure me and my siblings have heard about this one call on multiple occasions when we were younger. A teenage girl, young woman, had been kidnapped. The classic bait and switch, an older woman buying her drinks at a bar, being friendly, bending the rules. Ends up drugging her and handing her off to this guy who takes her back to his basement and assaults her. So trapped in a basement with a guy and a knife. He had fallen asleep, and the girl manages to find or get a phone and call 911. My mother answers and essentially walks this girl through getting help, from peeking out the basement windows and trying to find a street sign or anything helpful. It comes down to my mother and a few other dispatchers guiding police cars, lights blaring through the general area until the girl could see them and the officers could find her exact location. Safe and sound. After that, my mother got recognized at work for the effort, and she got a piece of paper commemorating the excellent work. So the adult version of an honor roll. Happened back in early 2000s Chicago. Story 13. Around 7 a.m., a male calls and says his wife is non-responsive, difficulty breathing, after her night shift at Waffle House. I dispatch in northern Kentucky, so an opioid overdose is suspected and probable. The caller was defensive and didn't want to answer questions, and I heard him talking to his young daughter in the background. The squad got there, confirmed overdose, 2 doses of Narcan revived her, and they transported her to the hospital. Basically, the most normal and best outcome overdose call I would deal with. Around 1 p.m. the same day, I get a 911 call from a very scared, but as calm as can be, young girl. I answered the phone. "Where is your emergency?" To which she answered, "Daddy did what Mommy did." I didn't get it at first. I had probably taken 3 to 4 more overdoses that morning, so it didn't click. She told me he was breathing a little, but couldn't tell me her address. I couldn't send anyone to her without knowing where she was. I remembered my trainer saying something about getting a license plate from outside if a child, maybe a diabetic patient, calls and is not able to give an accurate address. Got the plate, got the registered owner's address, and then it clicked. This child had to witness both of her parents overdosing at the age of about 7. I want to hug whoever taught her to call 911. Having an 8-year-old daughter now just makes me want to hug her. Story 14. Used to take ambulance calls for 999 over here in the UK and thought I'd add a more happy call here to buck the trend. I managed to deliver 5 babies while doing that job. The first one the dad was on, first thing he screams is, "The head's coming out, the head's coming out." Another one, they were on their way to the hospital when the baby just started arriving. So I delivered a baby over the phone on the side of a motorway. The sound of a baby crying during childbirth is the most stress-relieving sound of all. One of the families wrote in to say thank you, and I got to meet them and the baby. On the flip side, hangings were never fun. Thankfully, I only ever had two. The first was a Tuesday morning, just started my shift at 7 a.m., first call. Woman comes on screaming this blood-curdling noise, just pure emotion. Nothing like in the films. Turns out her husband had hung himself in their bedroom with the kids still in the house. So she was trying to keep the kids out while getting an ambulance. The other was a man who called ever so calmly to say his daughter had hung herself. I didn't understand why he was so calm and measured. Then he said at the end he was a police officer, so had seen this before. Poor guy. I still think about those two callers. Story 15. Let me preface this by stating I was the shift supervisor at the time and was only supposed to answer overflow calls, as it was my responsibility to make sure the other 14 dispatchers, call takers, were doing their job. I take an overflow call on July 4th around 9 p.m., figuring it was just another fireworks complaint or something easy, as that's what most calls on 4th of July are. I speak with an elderly lady who tells me her house is on fire and she is trapped on the 3rd floor. So already my heart is in my throat, trying to remain calm so I can try and calm this person down as much as possible. This is where having a wonderful partner really came in handy. My partner, who was the other shift supervisor, instantly took control over the dispatch operations. Once the rest of the room caught wind, I was on a hot call. They quieted down so my partner and I could communicate. In the meantime, while he is getting the fire service dispatched, I am doing everything in my power to make sure the lady keeps talking to me. I ascertained as many details about the room and how to get there as I could. Had her try to open the window, because at this point the room is filling with smoke. The few minutes it took the fire department to get there felt like an eternity. It really felt like time stopped. Once the fire department arrived, they pull up and find the house is only 2 stories tall, even though the lady said she was on the 3rd floor. Here it turns out at street level it's only 2 stories, but looking at the back of the house it's 3 stories due to the slope. As the fire department begins making entry, the woman collapses. So at this point, I'm not sure if she's going to make it. After a few seconds of not hearing from her, I finally could hear the firefighters' SCBA. A little bit of relief. Something happens in my brain though. I'm not sure if it was because I was scared for the woman maybe not making it. Maybe I was scared for the firefighters. And being a firefighter for 13 years, I could be in their position at any point. But while I was on the phone, I broke down in tears. In the 8 years of doing 911, this was the call that broke me mentally. The firefighters were able to rescue her. She lived and is still living despite 70% 3rd-degree burns. As successful as the outcome was, it messed with my brain for a while. I've dealt with a lot of death, murder, and trauma in my time, but this was the one that got to me. I continued to do 911 for a few months after that, but I'm not sure if it was depression or PTSD or some other kind of issue. I ended up resigning. It was to the point when I was home, I really wasn't home. It was affecting my relationship. Only recently have I made appointments to go get professional help. For any other emergency responders or anyone, for that matter, thank you for all you do. But seriously, if you're not feeling okay, get some help. It's not something to keep putting off. Story 16. Not an operator myself, and this happened in the UK. My sister had mental health issues since about 11. As a regular self-harmer, in November 2018, she cut a vein in her arm and rang for an ambulance or paramedic assistance. However, due to her mental instability and drug-alcohol abuse that night, she was on the phone to the emergency services operator for 45 minutes. The operator was trying to assess the situation and get information such as my sister's address. From my sister's point of view, the operator wasn't helping her, so my sister turned abusive towards the operator. However, due to my sister's mental state at the time, she was switching between being abusive and crying, begging for help. The operator failed to get the correct information in time. After an hour, an ambulance was finally sent to my sister's flat, but she was pronounced dead at the scene. Me and my family aren't holding the operator responsible at all. My mother has written a letter to the operator to explain the situation from our side. I heard the operator was pregnant at the time and was very traumatized by these events and took an extended leave of absence before her maternity leave. I've also been told she may never return to the job because of these events. Me and the family have been told not to listen to the call as it is very traumatizing. Definitely something the operator or our family will never forget. Story 17. I used to take 911 calls for my county in Maine, and then I dispatched for the largest town in the county. I know a lot of the people at the 911 call center very well, so if there was a call they sent over to me for dispatch that was interesting, was weird, hard, they'd message me on our system asking about it. Two calls in my time there stand out quite a bit. When I was working the 911 side of things, about a week into call taking, so I had a trainer right there with me, I got a call from one of our rural towns. Most of the towns are fairly rural. It was a 9 to 10-year-old boy telling me that his mom was in the front seat of her truck and that she wasn't breathing and wouldn't wake up. I had to walk him through dragging his mom out of the seat and onto the ground so he could start CPR. Because of where he was located, it took about 15 minutes for the first EMT to get there. We found out later that she had overdosed on Hero about 12 hours before that call, and her legs wouldn't flatten out, but stayed in a seated position. The other one was when I was dispatching. The guy called 911, gave his address and phone number, and confirmed them both. When asked for his name, he simply said that he didn't want to be found by his family and hung the phone up. One of the guys I knew at the call center let me know all this and said he had a really bad feeling about it. I sent 2 officers because I did as well. The officers arrived about 4 to 5 minutes after the initial call came in, and he had already taken his own life. The worst part of this was his mom, mother-in-law, brothers, and wife called in every 20 to 30 minutes asking for updates because he had made a Facebook post with a link to a website he had created as his note. I wasn't able to tell them anything more than, "Officers are there and will contact you shortly." The website, copied and pasted into Word, had 15 to 20 pages worth of writing, mostly to his young son about how he was better off without him in his life and how it was better that he was gone. Story 18. Not a 911 operator, but was an EMT in an urbanish area for a few years. The call in question was super straightforward. Dude was mid to late 60s, went out into the woods behind his house, and then took his own life. It was my first month on the job and my first time encountering something like that. I remember thinking it was kind of odd because he was pretty far back in the woods and laid out a tarp underneath him before he did it. And then we went into the house before we left to talk to the other officer on scene, and everything in the whole house was packed up and in boxes. The officer showed us a note where the guy talked about how much it hurt him when his wife passed, how he didn't have any other family. And then there was a long apology for doing it. He said he packed everything into boxes, cleaned the house, and laid out the tarp to be as considerate as possible of whoever ended up being stuck dealing with his estate. He didn't want to be a burden, but just couldn't do it anymore. I can't even really articulate what it is about this that stuck with me. Maybe the lengths he went to. I don't know. But every now and then I think of him and it just makes my heart sad. Story 19. I'll tell 2 since mine isn't particularly scary. Mine is being an operator for ADT. I got a burglary alarm ring and called in. It was a little girl about 13 years old. She gave the correct password and said the alarm was legitimate. She was hiding in her bedroom closet, whispering, and said the intruder was definitely still in the house. I had someone transfer over so they could stay on the line with her while I called the cops. Their operator got on, I explained the situation. She called in officers and then was able to transfer into the phone call so she could stay on the line with the girl until the cops arrived. By the time they did, the burglar was gone, so nothing terrible happened except for the shattering of a young girl's feeling of security. The second one was told to me by our trainer at ADT. I don't know all of the details that led up to what happened, but he had gotten a burglary alarm at a business and called in on it. The man who answered gave the correct password and was talking, and as my trainer and he were talking, the man on the line had his throat slit. Not sure about the aftermath, but hearing my trainer talk about that before I got on the phones made me a bit more reluctant to do the job. Story 20. Transfer from primary agency for a medical infant possibly not breathing, washed unconscious. Patient's mother states foam and blood coming from baby's mouth. Mother won't stop yelling, not screaming, just being loud except when she says, "Fuck," real angry. That baby is dead. Have to speak to her sharply to get her to answer me, as she's gone off on a rambling story about how she woke up from a nap and the baby was dead with blood coming from its mouth. Am instantly suspicious because she doesn't sound scared or concerned or even truly angry, just irritated. Am trying to get her to initiate CPR as she hasn't stated baby is both cold and stiff. So per protocol, I have to badger people in that scenario to start compressions. Mother refuses. I attempt to switch to guilt. So you're refusing to help? Is an effective question to throw at people who are squeamish about compressions. At no point has she expressed sadness or anything. Her story suddenly changes after 2 minutes, and now she didn't lay down for a nap. She was standing in her bedroom and something hit her in the back of the head. And when she woke up, the baby was gone, and now she can't remember anything. Still trying to get her to start CPR, but now I'm pumping her for information on a recorded line and just kind of letting her talk while regularly trying to redirect her to start CPR. Mother lights cigarette, won't stop saying, "I can't believe this is happening to me." Sounds like super entitled people sound when they want to talk to a manager. See her all over the news for having killed her baby the next day. Call out for 2 nights because I can't get her voice out of my head. When she changed her story, I could hear her smiling. Just the tone of her voice was her congratulating herself on coming up with a foolproof story. At one point, she even said, "Yeah," to herself, like she was convincing herself. And I never want to listen to someone develop their lie that they intend to use to cover for killing their 2-week-old ever again. Story 21. I made a call I will never forget, and I wish I could let the dispatcher know I made it. I had a sore throat for 2 days and woke up in the middle of the night because my throat had closed entirely and I couldn't breathe. I ran to the sink, forced a glass of water down my throat, and got maybe 20% of my airway back. I had to shout as hard as I could to get the air out faster so I could start breathing in more again and not pass out. I called 911 and it took them 8 minutes to get to my apartment. The whole time the dispatcher was just telling me to try to calm down and that they would be there soon. I remember begging for her to hurry, knowing it wouldn't matter what I said or did. There wasn't anything more I could do. I remember the subdued but present fear in her voice as she was just trying to coach me through it, knowing that there wasn't anything more she could do either. I lasted barely long enough for the EMTs to get into my apartment and emergency intubate me, shove a lubricated plastic tube down my throat. I ended up in and out of a 9-day medically induced coma, almost dying from pneumonia as one of my lungs filled with fluid. The recovery has taken a long time, and the ordeal was way more difficult than it sounds just from this. It's amazing to me to realize that this little 8-minute conversation was a prelude to such a monumental experience in my life. I wish I could thank her. She did a good job. Story 22. I will never forget this call because of how calm the caller was. I got this one last summer. I had just sat down when a woman called in, calmly stating she was at a cottage with her fiancé on a lake in cottage country in my province. She was relaxing on a lawn chair on her dock when she looked across the bay and saw a man casually walk out holding a human head, proceeded to swim around in the lake with it, screaming that he was free. I remember feeling absolutely horrible because I had to tell her that she couldn't go inside or look away because I needed to know exactly where the man was for officer safety reasons. Turns out the kid had harmed his own father with a machete and removed his heart. The more senior operators even told me they felt sorry for me and that they had never seen anything like that. Another call I won't forget is a girl who was killed in a crash when she, her cousin, and her sister were driving home from a party. They hit a tree and her sister called in. She said specifically there were 2 of us and 1 body. When I asked how she knew her sister was gone, she simply stated, "She doesn't have a head anymore." For some reason, the hysterical callers never really stuck. It was always the super calm ones. Story 23. I don't know if this will ever see the light of day on this post, but I've been a police officer for the better part of 2 years. In my short tenure, I have had the great pleasure of saving a few lives, including a 2-year-old who was purple and at the bottom of a pool when I arrived on scene. She lived, and oddly enough, I went to school with the parents of this child. However, that is unfortunately not my most memorable call. It has to be a tie between 2 of the more gruesome scenes I have ever had to handle. The first was in apparent Suic. We were just clearing the station, and the call goes out that this man had just taken his own life in the bathroom while his wife was in the shower. Sure enough, the whole squad and I show up, and out this lady runs holding a 2-year-old baby, screaming in horror, crying and begging for us to save him. However, there wasn't much left to save. Single incident to the head and a traumatic scene. As I entered the room and smelled the iron in the air, I verified with rescue that he was gone and proceeded to comfort the wife. The lady sobbed on my shoulder for 10 minutes, asking me why, asking me how, asking me what was it that she did. To this day, I can't shake the feeling I get when I pass that neighborhood. My second story is quite simple and short. After working a scene for a shooting, I get sent on a welfare check. I work in a rural area. However, our county stretches wide, and I end up west into a large swampland. The area is primarily inhabited by migrant workers and people who just prefer simpler living away from society. Essentially, I arrive at this shanty town of 3 to 4 makeshift trailers with racked-on porches. I wouldn't call the living conditions fit for an animal, truth be told. My reporting person was a 45-year-old male who hadn't heard from his 75-year-old father in 2 weeks. Upon my arrival, I could smell the smell. If you work in this line of work, you know what I'm talking about. It's the one where your skin crawls and you are already thinking, I'm going to need to grab the tape. I don't do just that yet. I make my way to the trailer where the smell is becoming more rancid. Upon the doorsteps to the porch lay the remains of a kitten, skeletal and partially intact, yet to be picked off by vermin. I approach the trailer door, and from the bottom of the door I can see the spill. For those of you who don't know, once the human body sits for too long, it essentially liquefies. This man was so far gone that his spill had been seeping out. I have fire rescue break the door down, and sure enough, right off the bedside is the father. Long gone, essentially decomposed after having sat inside of a trailer for at least a week and a half in southern Florida heat and humidity in the summertime. It is the sight of a human body so decayed and so far gone that I will never forget. Unfortunately for me, I am used to the smell. So whereas my partner couldn't get past the kitten, I was left to do the actual police work and inspect the body for signs of trauma. Believe it or not, it's rather hard to do that when you have a body so muddy and face sunken in that you can't even identify the deceased. I will never forget that day. I will never forget what I saw. And I will never stop wondering how that kitten died on that porch. Story 24. There are so many I'll never forget as long as I live, but there are two that stand out. The first was one of the very first 911 calls I ever took as a dispatcher on my own. It was right at the beginning of the shift. I got a call from a woman who was screaming and crying hysterically. Thank God she called from a landline, or I doubt I'd have ever gotten an address out of her. It turns out she'd woken up that morning and saw the light was on in the garage. This was unusual because her husband always turns it off when he leaves for work, so she goes to investigate. When she gets to the garage, she finds him lying there with a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the chest. This is where I tried getting her to control the bleeding since she said he was still breathing. But the whole time she was just screaming and begging him not to leave her and the kids, asking him how he could do this to her. Her screams and pleading cries are something I can still hear clear as day, and it's been almost a decade. Unfortunately, there was nothing we could do even though we made it on scene within 6 minutes from the start of the call. The second has a happier ending. It was the wee hours of the morning when the call came in. It was a woman who was frantic and hysterical. Her 6-month-old infant was unconscious, not breathing, and had turned blue. I got the call entered, then started trying to walk her through infant CPR. I had to speak a little more forcefully than normal to get her attention and break through the hysterics to get her to listen to me. But finally she did and started CPR. I kept pace for her and kept encouraging her until responders got on scene and took over. They were able to get a pulse back, and by the time they got to the hospital, the infant was breathing on its own again. I will always remember that one, because even if I never have another successful CPR call, at least it made a difference once when it really counted. Story 25. I'm no operator, but I know of a good one that no one in my family will ever forget. My cousin has fetal alcohol syndrome and paranoid schizophrenia. At this time, she was about 22, and Justin Bieber was first rising to stardom. That's important for later. My aunt never knew how to properly care for my cousin, and as a result, she was left largely untreated. My aunt put her in a small apartment in a bad part of town, and my cousin started getting in trouble with the authorities. A lot. She didn't know how to take care of herself and would break the law without even realizing it. Stealing, public nudity, touching or threatening people. And since police don't know how to handle someone like her, she'd get scared and fight back. Lots of arrests for assaulting an officer. Her apartment was also regularly burgled since people started figuring out that she didn't lock her doors. And if they stole her TV, a new one would magically appear, courtesy of my aunt, to steal again. My cousin never called these in, however. One day my aunt is contacted by the police regarding my cousin, and we're all assuming it's the usual. But they say she reported breaking and entering, as well as burglary and kidnapping. We were all very confused. Then they asked if we knew anyone who went by the name Justin Bieber. Here's what happened. My cousin had a severe schizophrenic episode in which she hallucinated that she not only had a baby, but that Justin Bieber, yes, that Justin Bieber, had broken into her house to steal said baby. So she called it in. The police came and found her apartment had actually been burgled, so they started investigating. Never found the guy who actually stole her stuff, but the police quickly established that a baby was not among the stolen property and that the Biebs was on tour and could not possibly have done the deed. Story 26. It was one of my first calls too. Had a young girl call to say that she was about to run away because she was being encouraged into an arranged marriage and she felt she couldn't say no to her family. She asked that when she runs away, we don't look for her. No matter who calls up to say that she's missing, it stumped me because no matter how much training you go through or role plays you enact, you can never be fully prepared for what may come in. And this was a scenario I hadn't even thought about before. Managed to calm the girl down and go over the differences between an arranged marriage and a forced marriage, the latter being illegal with protections available. Everyone should have the right to choose who to marry, when, if to marry. I had to explain that we can't ignore a report of a missing person, but then made her aware of the various support available to her and the charities that specialize in similar circumstances. So she didn't feel she had to go through this alone, that there's a middle ground between running away and dealing with her family. I really feel like I could have done more for the girl and haven't been able to shake that feeling since. Story 27. Listening to a husband watch his wife die in front of him whilst his ambulance was off chasing a hoax call. I'm a 999 call handler for the ambulance service in the UK, so I only deal with medical calls. I took a call from a man whose wife, in her mid-60s, had collapsed in the bathroom. She was still conscious and breathing, but was really poorly. Something seemed off, so I stayed on the line. This was coded as a call requiring an emergency response, but not the top priority. So when my colleague next to me took a call for a top priority case about 10 miles from my address, the crew who had been driving to mine got reassigned to that job. I got another ambulance assigned pretty quickly, but it was from further away, adding 15 minutes to the wait. Throughout the call, the husband, an ex-policeman, was crying and begging me to hurry, asking for information on where they were that he knew I couldn't give. When the crew were mere minutes away, he suddenly stopped and said, "Oh God, she's gone." And I heard the phone clatter to the ground as he rushed to her. I tried to call out to him to find out what was happening, knowing that I was about to have to tell him to do CPR, but he didn't come back. It was the longest 2 minutes of my life waiting to hear the sound of the crew rushing in. They attempted resuscitation, but she sadly didn't make it. Had the original ambulance not been diverted, they would have been there before she arrested. As it were, they were trying to locate a female who had allegedly been kidnapped and was being viciously assaulted, stabbed, injected with drugs, and more. All a complete fabrication courtesy of a scorned ex-boyfriend. To add to this, my colleague next to me taking this call knew it was a hoax, but we cannot judge the integrity of the caller and had to take it seriously. Some angry ex-boyfriend thought wasting an ambulance was all fun and game, whilst a man watched his life partner die in front of him. I cried so much with anger, sadness, and frustration. I know there's nothing I could do, but I still feel like I failed that man. We advised the police of what happened, but I doubt anything will come of it. I just hope that man can carry on with his life and doesn't blame me for what happened. Story 28. Got a 911 call from a hysterical 13-year-old girl saying someone was in her house trying to hurt her and her mom. Mom grabs the phone from her and tells me her husband has been shot and is dying. She took herself and her son and daughter upstairs and locked themselves in a bedroom. I was able to get the address, the name of the suspect, their neighbor, and a basic description: male, white, gray sweatshirt. I ask if he came on foot or in a vehicle, and I don't get any type of response, and I'm left with an open line. I start hearing slamming and shrieking followed by gunshots. which aren't as loud as you'd think over the phone. More shrieks of terror and then silence. The suspect had kicked in the door, shot and killed the mother and her 8-year-old son, and shot the 13-year-old daughter through her hands and into her face. She was the only one that survived. Officers pulled up right as he was shooting them and immediately put out a call of officers in trouble. The suspect ran out of the house with the gun, and the officers opened fire on him. The suspect died at the hospital about 2 hours later. The call went as well as it could have possibly gone. It was less than 1 minute from the time the call started to the open line, and I was able to get the absolute critical details through her panic. The first unit on scene was quite literally right around the corner from the house when the shooting call was put out. Story 29. My first year on the job, I was working alone one night when we had a walk-in in the lobby at 5:45 in the morning. She and her mother were requesting a welfare check on her brother's girlfriend. He had shown up unexpectedly at her apartment with his 3-year-old son and seemed upset. All he would say to her was, "It's over, over, and over." She stated her brother and his girlfriend had an on and off relationship, and she was worried they'd gotten into a fight. The call is in my buddy's area, so I dispatch him. No answer at the door. I ask the supervisor what his pleasure is, and he says to send the fire department to make forced entry. By this time, the patrol sergeant, poor guy was on an overtime shift, has joined my buddy who's chatting on the phone with me. We're laughing over how this girl's probably gone to sleep after a breakup, argument, and the poor thing is going to wake up to like 6 dudes in her bedroom demanding to know if she's okay. 99% of the time, that's how it goes. Well, turns out she was not okay. The boyfriend had strangled her to death in front of their kid, then dropped the kid off with his sister and mom and fled to California. They caught him there about a year later. But we all wound up staying very, very late that day. I had to give a written and verbal statement to state police and later had to testify in front of a grand jury. The whole thing was pretty intense, especially for how relatively new I was, LOL. Story 30. I was a dispatcher for about 4 years in a rural county. The worst call I got was a hunting accident. A guy took his 6-year-old son out hunting with him and gave the kid a loaded rifle to carry with him. The kid, while trying to get through tamarack bushes, grabbed the weapon by the barrel and dragged it behind him. The weapon got caught on a branch and discharged into the kid's head. The father called 911, got me, and didn't know where he was at, as he wasn't familiar with the area and it wasn't his land. All he could tell me was that they had passed a lake or pond on a dirt road. There are several dirt roads with ponds, and I was able to narrow it down to 6 roads with the location data from the cell towers. This was the early 2000s and triangulation in rural areas wasn't great. No idea how much better it is now. And his information. I dispatched every deputy I had on duty, all 2 of them, the 1 city cop I had on duty, and both our ambulances and fire trucks to the areas. State Patrol also assisted with the search. It took us over 20 minutes to find them, and the whole time the father wept uncontrollably, screaming, "Please don't be gone," over and over again through the instructions I gave him from the flip chart to check vitals, try to stop the bleeding, etc. My instructions only lasted about 5 minutes, and I had given him all the info I was trained to give. The remaining 15 felt like an eternity, and from what the father told me and what I was told by the deputies afterward, he was pretty much gone immediately after the accident. The EMTs still went through with their routines and loaded the child in the ambulance because none of them felt comfortable doing otherwise in the situation. This was my first shift back after the birth of my son, so I think that's why it sticks with me. Story 31. I was recently released from training, and I got a call that someone fell out a window and onto a wrought iron fence. Then I got a call from someone else that her boyfriend was high off PCP and tried to fly. Needless to say, he didn't survive. He made it all the way to the ER ambulance bay with a section of fence impaling him, then went into cardiac arrest. Second one I remember is a call for a bad motorcycle accident on the highway. The first call I got, the guy said the bike just rammed full speed into the back of a box truck and exploded into flames. Got a whole bunch of calls describing the bodies as being strewn over the road. The first officers on scene instantly said we had 2 DOAs. The woman was burned beyond recognition, and the man's entire face was gone, ripped away from crashing and sliding on the roadway. The bike was so burned they couldn't run the plates or VIN, and their wallets burned so they had no ID to look at. There was a bag, all of the contents spilled over the roadway, and it was filled with baby supplies. Turns out the woman was on a quick run to fetch supplies for her baby and never made it back. The officers managed to identify the victims because family members were nearby and heard of the accident and knew they'd gone out just a short while beforehand. Story 32. It's been years now, but I worked for a private ambulance service that the 911 dispatch routed calls to so we could prioritize and send the ambulance. We were busy enough where there should have been two of us, but there rarely was. Calm night, one truck on a non-emergency call, and then all hell broke loose. Got a direct call for a suicidal subject who had a gun and was planning to use it. So I needed to get people en route, including police, to protect my crews. And the floodgates opened. I took 9 emergency calls in the next 4 minutes, and at one point had 3 active phones. Guy with the gun set on my counter, an emergency call in each hand, and just telling crews a location and whether it was lights and sirens or not. When I picked up the phone on the counter, the guy wasn't there anymore. After this, I got a second person full-time, but I still wondered if it would have made a difference that night. On a more positive note, we got to attend an awards ceremony when my partner and I talked to a set of parents through CPR that actually worked and met those parents. That was a nice moment. Story 33. I'll share my mom's story because she doesn't do the Reddit. She's a retired dispatcher who still fills in to help sometimes. And this is her favorite story. She gets a call one night from a local guy who considered himself the lone neighborhood watch. Incidentally, we'd seen him a lot because he mostly patrolled, and I use that term loosely, an area near our house. He was one of those retired, righteous, do-gooder types that ironically inspired some 911 calls himself because, hey, this weird dude walks around the neighborhood all night. He'd call in a lot to report suspicious behavior. Real menacing stuff like kids on bikes after dark or a car driving down a cul-de-sac only to turn around and drive out of it. One night, he calls around 2 a.m., and he's in complete hysterics. A group of kids had assaulted him. My mom starts to take the info of where he's at, how badly is he injured, and all those details. She's thinking an ambulance will be needed and starting to really worry for this cantankerous doom merchant when he reveals that, well, he's not really hurt. He was on his nightly patrol when a group of kids in a car had the audacity to drive by and assault him. With what weapon? A gun? A rock? Their fists? No, they had thrown half a banana at him. So, she keeps herself from losing it, laughing at her console, and says she'll have an officer contact him to take a report on this banana incident, and they hang up. Moments later, he calls back, and he is losing his mind. He needs all the cops to descend on the neighborhood right this minute. The criminal ingrates return to assault him a second time. The weapon? Literally the other half of the same banana. This guy was a card. She has a lot of sad and traumatic stories, but also a lot of funny ones. 911 dispatchers deal with seriously awful moments, but I think most of her days just required consistent patience and empathy. The majority of her calls were from people who were drunk or high, spending most of the call yelling at her, local people with mental health needs who were scared or confused, and a lot of calls just for information to the non-emergency line. Story 34. It was around Valentine's Day. We received a call from a business in our town that said they had a young child, 2 to 4 years old, on the line and weren't able to transfer them to us. The kids said something about their parents and how they weren't waking up. The business was fortunately able to get the number off their caller ID. While we were waiting to receive our first pings from the cell company, I took the number and worked my magic. I've got multiple ways I've found where I can look up all kinds of stuff from a phone number, including names and addresses. I found a possible address that was 2 cities away from us. I cross-referenced the name with voter records and came up with the same address. I began to send a terminal message to that agency to start a welfare check. About when I did that, we got the first ping. The ping was garbage. Instead of being down to several meters, it gave us the distance of 5 miles within that cell tower, which normally you wouldn't be able to do hardly anything with. But that 5-mile radius contained that address I found in that city. I sent the ping info to that agency. They got there and found the child. It was a murder-suicide of the parents and looked like a scene from a crime show in the bloody container. The child was safe and unharmed. Story 35. Honestly, the hardest ones aren't the shootings or the terrible accidents or things like that. We're typically only on the line with those people for 90 seconds. It's easy to compartmentalize. When we're doing CPR, it takes longer. but we're focused on a task the whole time. Same thing with home invasions. We're trying to gather intelligence and help the caller find a safe exit or shelter. It's totally task-focused. The hardest calls are the suicidal callers. There's some basic info gathering we have to do, but after that, our job is to keep them talking, and that invariably means making some form of connection. It's a little different than SUIC hotlines because we handle the cases where they have a specific plan or means to end their life. They're the ones that stick with you because there's no pro QA or script that you can pass the blame off to if you fail. You're just left asking, maybe if I had asked them different questions or phrased things a different way. There's one in particular that stuck with me. I think about him all the time. Mike was a successful local businessman who was caught in a sting around 2 years before I first talked to him. The story was published in the local papers. All his clients left him, and his wife divorced him. When I talked to him, he was living out of a motel because he lost his home, and he was having a hard time finding an apartment because he was now a registered offender without a stable income. He was 53 and didn't really have any hope of starting a new career. He was a gentle guy, super articulate. I just remember him asking me what he had left to live for. Honestly, if you were in my shoes, would you want to keep going? And all I could give him was platitudes because honestly, my answer would have been no. I talked to Mike 3 times over the course of about a month. No idea if he went through with it or not, but I still think about him all the time. Doesn't help that he was the exact same age my dad was when he passed, and even kind of sounded like him. Story 36. House explosion shot your fire with 2 trapped in the basement and 3 ejected from the building. When we arrived on scene, we were greeted with a house completely engulfed in flames and police washed firefighters everywhere. When we got out of the truck, a police officer was yelling at us while holding a man saying, "This is your patient." Our patient was a man covered in approximately 15% superficial burns, 50% partial thickness burns, and 10% full thickness burns. He didn't have an ounce of hair left on him, and the skin from his back began flaking off in black strips. We transported him to the hospital, and he was flown to a burn center. I'm unsure what became of him, but I won't forget him or the amount of pain he was in. Now, what about the other 2 ejected from the building? We were the first on scene, and we didn't see them. Our view was blocked by a fire engine, and on the other side was a 4-year-old boy and his mother. We got tunnel vision and just went with the nearest patient. Luckily, another crew arrived less than 5 minutes after we did, and they took both mother and child. After the event, I ignored going to group counseling and thought I was fine. Then I started getting nightmares a few weeks later. Thankfully, I have a wonderful wife that I can talk to about these things and work through my issues. Story 37. A few will stick with me forever. The most heart-wrenching one was an elderly man who called 911 and said he needed an ambulance. He calmly gave his address, then said he had harmed his wife and that he would be in the backyard when help arrived. I tried to get more information from him, but he just hung up. The ambulance got there and found him and his wife deceased in the backyard. It turns out she had a terminal illness and didn't want to suffer anymore. She asked him to help her. He couldn't live without her or with the decision they made, so he took his own life. On a happier note, one call I'll never forget was a mother in labor. It was a healthy, normal pregnancy. I helped the dad coach mom through the labor, then eventually coached dad through delivering his own child. I can still hear that first cry like it happened yesterday. As soon as the baby cried out, the ambulance crew walked through their front door. Dad was crying and thanking me for helping. All I could say was, "You're so very welcome. Congratulations, Dad." Also, on a somewhat happy note, this call is the one I'm most proud of. I had a mom call 911 for her teenage son because he was not breathing. He had some sort of rare form of vocal cord dysfunction where his vocal cords tightened so much that he couldn't take a breath in. 911 dispatchers have guide cards to help with common ailments. The card for someone who is not breathing instructs you to give CPR. The boy was still conscious, but he just couldn't take in a breath. So CPR would have been pointless, and just giving rescue breaths would have possibly torn his vocal cords, or more likely, would have been completely ineffective. I had to think back to my voice lessons as a child. Raising the chin lengthens the vocal cords. I told Mom to have the boy raise his chin. He raised his chin, and I heard a huge gasp of air. It had worked. Then Mom says excitedly, "He took a breath." Oh my God, he took a breath. But now he can't exhale. If raising the chin lengthens the cords, then lowering it must loosen them, right?